I make it 100 in the big blind. He just ships it after he limps. Blank off. Blank off. Boom. Hey guys, what's up? What's up? Alex back in action. Today I decided, you know what? I saw some guy once win a WSOP main event, WSOP event from a Whole Foods parking lot. And I was like, you know what? I gotta go down to Whole Foods, grab some stuff. I'm gonna bring my computer, so I bring my laptop, and I'm gonna grind at Whole Foods, and I'm gonna try and win as much as I can as well. So I love Whole Foods. I love sitting outside there. They have a great bar, snacks, whatever, and I could get some healthy food and just kick it outside. So after coming off a win, I'm feeling great. I think we're 4 out of 5. We've really been crushing lately. Knock on my steering wheel, and really feeling positive about how everything is going. I am definitely sticking to the game plan. I know how these short stacks play. I've actually found that 3-betting the short stacks works really, really well because they open to, like, let's say you're playing 10-20, right? They open to $44. They love that sizing. And if you make it 120, they actually fold quite a bit because they're in a spot where they have to either go all in or fold. And so they're kind of put in this binary situation where they have to risk 1,000 and you're only risking 120. So you're like basically getting 8 to 1 on your money. You're risking 120, they're risking 1,000. And if you make that play when you're in position, it's actually really effective. So don't tell anyone that, but that's been working really well against the short stacks. And then against the regs, it's, you know, they're good. I mean, but at the same time, I feel like I have a good handle on how they play. A lot of them take this, like, you know, some of them are very aggro and they just don't fold in any spots. They call all your raises and they are very active in 3-bet pots. And against those players, what I do that works really well is I actually flat call with some stronger hands, and then I value raise post flop. So for example, if I have a strong hand facing a 3-bet, facing a 4-bet, I'll flat call and then I'll value raise the flop, or I'll check call the flop. And this really deceives them and ends up putting them in a spot where they think I'm weak and they want to attack. So basically when someone's aggressive, the moral of the story is when someone's aggressive and they're really, really applying a lot of pressure in a lot of spots and they're always going for it when they have the lead, my strategy is to give them rope. So I like to trap with my strong hands. Against players that are more passive, you have to build a pot. So I like to be the one that's more aggressive, and I like to check raise a lot of flops against those types of players. So I kind of have 2 general strategies that I've developed against these pros, depending on which type of pro they are. And then my challenge in playing these games is basically to identify which type of player I'm playing against. And there's certain cues that I'm using to help me do that. So how big are they 3-betting? How often are they 3-betting? Are they checking back flops? And I'm using these cues to kind of profile them into one of these 2 categories and then to develop a game plan accordingly. So it's been working really well. Nothing's broken. I ain't gonna fix it. I've been playing my best. I'm really focused when I'm playing. The games are great. There's VIPs there and there's some solid pros, which I'm having fun and enjoying the challenge of playing and competing and trying to outplay. And that's it. I'll see you guys at Whole Foods. Alright, I'd make it 100 in the big blind. Literally, this shit is bananas. Where else do you see someone limp for 20? I make it 100 in the big blind, and he just ships 2,700 with ace-6. Like, where do you see them? Alright guys, welcome to the lab. If you enjoyed the grind so far, thank you so much for being here. It would mean the world to me if you hit that like button. It really helps us show this video to more people so we can grow our channel. And be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you're the first to know when more awesome content like this one or hand reviews, Ask Alec episodes all come your way. Now let's dive into the key hands from this session. The first one is a cool example of when I think is an opportune time to go for a bluff. We're going to talk about some of the fundamentals of bluffing strategy and when is a good situation to do so, in particular with a focus on the turn, because it's a situation. I just worked with a client actually this morning, where they really get this wrong. So they get the narrative right of bluffing, but they get the sizing wrong, and it turns a potentially profitable play into a losing one. Anyway, this hand kicks off. We're 3-handed. I'm on the button. I make it 50. I make it 40 on the button because the blinds were 3-betting quite often. So I decided to make a smaller sizing to give myself a better price on my raises. I make it 40 on the button with King 4 offsuit with the King of Clubs and the big blind calls, okay? Flop comes 6-3 deuce with 2 clubs. The big blind checks, I bet 40, pretty standard small continuation bet, just feeler, hoping he folds his air, of course, and he calls, fine. Turn comes a jack, not a club, he checks, and at this point, this is a better card for me than it is for him, and I want you to think about why. Why is the jack a better card for me than it is for him? Why don't you go ahead and pause this video, leave a comment below. You know, we're going to do something fun. The best comment will give a free month to our membership at Conscious Poker, of our grinder membership at Conscious Poker. So I'm putting that out there. The best comment's going to get a free month. Go ahead and pause this video, leave a comment below. Why is the jack a better card for me than it is for him? All right, so the turn comes, he checks, I go ahead and bet 160. And it's important to be barreling on these turns. It's important to be applying pressure in spots like these because the jack interacts better with my range than it does with his range. It's easier for me to have a jack in my hand because I can be betting the flop with more hands that contain a jack easier than my opponent can be calling the flop with hands that contain a jack, right? I could be bluffing with jack 8 or jack 10 or jack 9 or king jack or queen jack, right? He's not going to call the flop with those hands. He's not going to call the flop with jack high. So this card's more likely to benefit my range than it is his range. And that's a fancy way of saying this card is good for me, it's bad for him, right? Technical, fancy way of saying what I'm saying. So these are good situations to bluff, and you want to bet big in spots like these. And the mistake people make is they bet really small. And I just worked with a client today that had the narrative right if he was betting in spots like these, but he was betting so small, it would be like equivalent to me betting 60 here, that it's easy for his opponent to call again with ace high or a 6 or pocket 4s or whatever, because he's not applying a lot of pressure. So the strategy is to bet when these cards help your hand, but to bet big because you have a big advantage in terms of like the chance that your hand is stronger than your opponent's, right? So I bet 160 he calls, and at this point I'm not loving my spot, but there's certain rivers that I'm planning on bluffing. The river comes a 9 of clubs, he checks again, and at this point I have the king of clubs in my hand, I have a 4 in my hand, so I do block some strong hands, and I think it's a really good spot to bluff. If he did have like pocket 4s, pocket 5s, or a 6-5 or 6-7, it's going to be very tough for him to call this river. The flush got there, I could be value betting a jack or an overpair, or I could have flopped a big hand, or whatever. So I decided to bet again. I make it 360, which I wanted it to look a little bit like a value bet, so I didn't bet too big. I didn't want to bet like 500 to make it look like I either have a flush or nothing. I wanted to bet smaller to make it look like I could be value betting a jack. So by betting smaller, I made it seem like there are more hands that I could be value betting, and I think that makes it more likely he folds because it looks like I have more hands that are stronger than whatever he has. I bet 360, he folds, and I win myself a nice pot. This next hand is really, really fun because it's a play you don't get to see, you don't get to make often, and it's a play you don't get to make often in the streets. So under the gun raises, this was me, I raised under the gun to 50 with ace 4 of hearts, and the villain calls in the big blind, okay? So the flop comes king 8-7 rainbow, he checks, and I opt to check behind. Isn't a great flop for me. Not many turns I can double barrel profitably, and it's a flop that could have connected well with hands he's defending with, even if he has some like jack 10, 10-9, jack 9. He's going to float the flop, and what am I going to do? I'm not going to bet the turn. He's going to bluff me on the river. I'm not going to win this pot regardless, so I just give up. I kind of concede this pot. Turn comes a 5, giving me a straight draw, and he bets kind of small here on this turn. I think he bets like 50. And so I'm getting a good price. I could have the best hand. Again, I beat all of his straight draw bluffs, right? So I opt to call. Just call in position and try and get the showdown. Hopefully he checks the river, and I could win this pot if he's bluffing. All right, river comes a 9, so 1 card straight, and now he bets 150. So at this point, he's basically either repping a straight, or maybe he has 2 pair or a set, or a bluff. Unlikely he's bluffing, just because a lot of his bluffs maybe now made like a pair, like if he had 10-9, he now has a pair or whatever. But it's really hard for him to have a 6, right? Like, what hands does he have that have a 6 in them? Maybe something like 7-6, like a pair and a straight draw on the turn. But a lot of hands he can have are going to be value betting thin. Maybe he has a set, maybe he has 2 pair. He's going to value bet all those, given the fact that I check behind on the flop. So he's going to make these thin value bets here. Me, on the other hand,
when I decide to raise here, I ended up making it 350, so like basically a min raise. I'm really never bluffing. Like, what hands am I going to be checking the flop, calling the turn, and then bluffing the river with? It's just not a spot where people bluff often, and frankly, I don't have that many bluffs. So by going for a min raise here, it screams like I'm hoping that I get him to call with 2-pair or a set. And basically, it's a play that doesn't have to work that often. If he doesn't have a 6, he's going to fold. And so my play doesn't have to work that often for this to be a profitable one. And he ends up tanking for a little while and ends up folding. I think he folded 2-pair. So it's a cool play. You don't get to see it made often. And great, best of all, it worked. This next hand was a fun one and a good example of when I think it's prudent to adopt a leading strategy. Which types of hands are good to lead out with. So villain opens in the cutoff to 50 and I call in the big blind with 6-4 of clubs. Okay, so the flop comes down 10-8-7 with a diamond draw and I decide to lead out 60. I led here because my hand is not really strong enough to check call, number one. I'm going to check call with a gut shot, or like, I guess I'm a double gutter, right? I could win with a 5 or a 9, but if a 9 comes, I don't have the best straight, and there's also a flush draw on the board. So I can't really check call out of position here with 6 high just because I don't have enough equity. It's not really a great spot for me. It's also a situation where this board is likely to interact well with my range, right? I'm the big blind. I could have a big blind special. I could easily smash this board. So rather than letting him c-bet and forcing me to fold, I decided to bet out here on this flop and hope that he folds something like ace-king, ace-queen, or whatever. If he does flat me, which is fine, I could still win with a 9, I could win with a 5, and I can maybe bluff on a diamond. So I actually like c-betting this flop, and this is one of the few situations where I take the lead away from my opponents and opt to apply pressure and come out barreling right out of the gate. So I bet 60, he calls, and the turn comes at ace of clubs. Normally I would shut down here if he calls this board just because I expect him to keep calling on the turn and the river. If it's a blank on the turn, I'm not going to bet on a deuce. Like, if he called me on the flop, he's probably going to call me again on the turn, either with a draw or like an overpair. I'm not expecting him to fold. But the turn being an ace is actually a pretty good card. If he did flat the flop with like jacks or something or queens, it's hard for him to call another bet here on this ace because maybe I was bluffing with a nut flush draw. Maybe I was betting the flop with ace 10. Maybe I was betting the flop with ace 9. So, I mean, some of my hands now improved. I obviously could have smashed this flop as well and had a really strong hand. So this is one of the few turns that I opt to decide to bluff again on because I think I could apply enough pressure to hopefully get him to fold if he doesn't have like the nut flush draw or doesn't have ace 10, right? Of course I could get unlucky, he can have those hands, but a lot of times he's just going to fold. If he has a hand like queen 10, what's he going to do? Call me on this turn? He's not going to call the turn, he's going to fold. So I come out firing, I bet 220. And again, I want to bet big here to apply a lot of pressure because I really want him to fold. I don't want to make it easy for him to call me in position and then not know where I'm at on the river. I bet 220. To my dismay, he calls, but to my pleasure, the river comes a offsuit 5. So gin river for me, pretty much impossible for him to put me on 6-4. So at this point, the pot's like 780 or so, and I really have like the option to make a bet here. But the key strategy in a spot like this is to utilize a big bet size. When you're betting this spot here on this river, what I'm saying to him on this river is I have a hand better than 1 pair. So no matter what size I bet on the river, I'm always going to have, 2 pair, a set, a straight, or a bluff. I'm never going to bet the river with like a 10. I'm never betting the river with 8-9. I mean, if I'm bluffing, maybe I will, but I'm not betting for value with 1 pair. So there's really no reason for me to ever bet small here. I'm either repping really, really strong, like flop the nuts, or I'm repping a bluff. And so I want to apply the maximum amount of pressure and bet very, very big to put his range, to put him in a very tough spot. This makes me a lot tougher to play against. It gets me a better price on my bluffs. I mean, it makes my bluffs more likely to succeed rather. And it also gives me more room to gain value when I actually have a strong hand. So I bet 1.5 times the pot. I bet like 12-20. And it really puts him in a tough spot. So what you want to think about in spots like these when you're playing against better players is how do you put them in really tough spots? How do you make yourself difficult to play against? That's really important as you move up in limits and start playing against better competition. I bet 12-20. At this point, when he calls the turn, I feel like he probably has something that can call. Maybe he has a draw, but his draws are going to fold regardless of what size I bet. So I don't really lose anything by betting bigger when he has a draw. But if he does have something like ace 10 or 2 pair, or he flopped a set, or he has like the nut flush draw, he's going to be in a really tough spot, and he's probably going to call me because he beats all my bluffs, right? He only has to call 1 bet, so why bet smaller when I can bet bigger? I bet 12-20. He tanks for a while, calls with ace 3 of diamonds, so he turned the nut flush draw and ended up hero calling me. Unfortunately for him, I had the winner, and this was an epic session. So thank you for your attention. Let's wrap up this video. Oh wait, I almost forgot. We got one more hand. So this hand was truly epic. Okay, so probably the coolest hand of the session. Well, actually, the coolest hand of the session was the one I told you about during the vlog where the guy limped. I made it 100 and he just shipped it all in for 2,700 with ace-6. That was the coolest hand. But this hand was truly epic. So villain raises under the gun +1 to 50. And I call in the big blind with 5-3 hearts. As you notice, I like to defend my big blind. I feel like I have an edge against players post-flop. I really like to maneuver and potentially outplay them. And I'm going to defend my big blind. So the flop comes down queen 5-4 with 1 heart, okay? I check, he bets $33. So this is a very small bet. And if you use a solver, you study game theory, you're supposed to be raising a lot versus small bets. It's like the solver really favors raising. For 2 reasons. One is that the villain's range is very wide for betting small. They're going to be betting with a large number of hands, and you want to apply pressure on that. Because they have so many hands that they could be betting with, their range is likely weaker, meaning the more that they bet, the less strong that their range is, the less strong hands that they can have. And so you want to be raising. You want to be raising to force them out of the pot. You want to be raising to protect your hand. You want to be raising to get value. It's a good spot to bluff. So I decided to raise here to 166. And I do that because there's so many bad turns for my hand. Let's say he has something like ace-jack, right? I don't want to let him see a free turn, because if the turn comes a king, the turn comes an ace, the turn comes a jack, the turn comes a 10, he's going to bet again. He's either going to pick up the best hand or bluff, and I'm going to be forced to fold my mid pair. Whereas if I raise the flop, I force those hands to fold, and so I actually end up winning the pot, whereas if I flat call, I end up losing the pot. So it's important not only to think about what your equity is or what your chance of winning is, it's important to think about the dynamic of the hand and how the hand is likely to play out based on the action you take. So you want to think about, like, am I likely to get to the river? Am I likely to get the showdown? How is this hand going to play? And what are my options on subsequent streets depending on the action I take right now? So I decided to raise here on this flop. I might have the best hand, of course, as well. And he ends up calling. Fine. Turn comes a 10 of hearts, bringing me a flush draw. And I really have 2 options here. I can check call this turn and just realize my equity and, you know, potentially pick off bluffs if he was floating the flop, or just pot control if he has something like ace queen. I don't want to necessarily have to bet and then have him jam. So I can just check call the turn, and then, you know, my decision's very easy on the river. I call if the river is a 5, a 3, or a heart, or I check raise on those rivers, and if it's not, I just check fold. That's definitely one option. What I decided to do on this turn, and I like to do this against better players, is to what is called merge my range. And it's a fancy way of saying you include hands in your betting line that are not necessarily the nuts or nothing. So typically in spots like these, people, when they check raise the flop and bet the turn, they either have like queen 10, queen 5, queen 4, 5-4, a set of 5s, a set of 4s, or they're bluffing, right? So they either have like the super strong premium nutted hands, or they're bluffing. But what I think it's important to do against better competition, and again, as you're moving up the limits, you're playing better players, like we are here in 1020, it's important that, like, you can have certain hands that they wouldn't expect, because on the river, what ends up happening is you find yourself in situations where you have hands that they think are impossible for you to have, and then you can win money. So if the river comes a heart, it's important that I could sometimes have hearts, given the line that I took. Or if the river comes a 5, it's important that sometimes I can have a 5 in my hand. And maybe I can check call, and he doesn't expect me to have a 5, so he goes for a bluff, or he overvalues a certain hand. Or I go all in on the 5 on the river, and he doesn't expect it, so he hero calls me. So it's important to be able to have more hands in your range as you're playing against better players. This isn't something I necessarily think is, like, very important to implement if you're playing, you know, 2-5 live or small stakes online. But certain situations, it's important to be able to have a wider range of hands in a certain given spot, because it just makes you more balanced, it makes you harder to play against, and it protects your overall range, right? So I go ahead and bet 320 on the turn, and now he just ships it. And so this is a spot where I've ran a solver for a lot of times. Like, I've ran my equity versus versus his range. And you can see here on this graph, I'm going to put up here on the screen, these are all the hands that I assumed he could have. So he can have some sets. Let's say he has all the sets. Let's say he has some aces, some kings, queen 10 suited, but he also has some bluffs, maybe like ace jack of hearts that floated the flop, ace deuce of hearts, 7-6 suited, or king jack suited that floated the flop and now turned open-ended. He bluffs all in with these hands. My equity is still 40%, right? That's pretty strong, 38%, 40%. That's like my worst case scenario. So it's important in spots like these to understand what your pot odds are, So I want to look at the size of the pot and the size of the bet and calculate my pot odds, and then to match that against my chance of winning. And anytime my odds are, anytime my chance of winning is greater than my odds, I should be calling. Right? This is a fundamental way to approach poker. When your chance of winning is greater than your odds, you should call. When your chance of winning is worse than your odds, you should fold. That's really the first principal way of thinking about how to make decisions in poker. So at this point, I've ran these situations before. I've studied this in the lab. I've gone through how to study poker to know these spots. So I'm prepared when I face these jams to know what the right play is mathematically. I know what to do. So I ended up calling here. He had ace deuce of hearts, and I won myself a nice pot. The river blanked, and I literally, with fourth pair, won a 4K pot. So if you want more about how to study these situations, and you're really looking for that next level in your poker game of like, how do I know what to do in certain spots? How do I figure out what my odds are and my equities versus my ranges and count the combos and do all this in real time in a way that's easy to implement? I highly recommend you check out Alec's Academy. It's the ultimate poker business course. We help people turn poker into a profitable side hustle or full-time endeavor. And I walk you through my blueprint for how to study poker like the pros in live coaching calls. So you can apply for that at the link below, or just visit alex.academy, ALECS.academy, and you can apply to join our next cohorts in spring. It's really awesome. It's our best product, and I'm really confident it will help take your game to the next level. Thank you for being here. Let's wrap up this vlog, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
All right, guys. Overall, really happy with how I played today. Man, it's hard to be critical when things are going so well. I'm playing well. I'm running well. Good things happen. My hands are holding up, and I just got a lot of momentum. We won a little over $6 today in an hour and a half, but shoot, man, got a lot of confidence. It's great to be on a good start on this bull run in the beginning of when I'm playing. Really going to stick to my game plan, really punishing some short stacks, applying pressure in some 4-bet pots where I feel like people are just 3-betting me light, check raising a lot of flops when I feel like it's well timed, even 3-bet a flop today. So just a lot of things went right. Good timing. I'm not gonna lie. Of course, you have to have that to win the amount I've won in the time I've won it. But also, I feel like there's certain spots where I just know I'm finding that edge, and that's gonna compound for me and manifest long term. Hope you enjoyed this. Subscribe and like. More awesome content's coming. I'll see you in the next episode of Alec in Action.